We are just a few days away from the exciting release of Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. And to celebrate on this channel, I decided I'm going to review every single movie. Well, maybe not so much review, but just give my general thoughts on every single one. We've all seen them a million times. It's not like I need to go into well, maybe a little detail, but not a lot of detail. And I will be going in timeline order, so that way I can save the best for last. You thought I was going to say it. You actually thought I was going to say it. This is funny. It's one of the best, though. All right, let's do this. George Lucas has said many times that he has made Star Wars for kids. Now, I was 11 when this came out, and as far as I'm concerned, in that realm, yeah, he succeeded. It's full of fun ships to look at, a bad guy that looks like the devil, and actual Jedi doing Jedi stuff. But now that I'm older, the only thing I see is that George Lucas kinda lost his way. There was this 16-year gap between the release of Return of the Jedi and The Phantom Menace. And somewhere along the way, it just feels like George lost his passion and made this movie more out of obligation. He has admitted in the past that he's not much of a dialogue writer, and if it were me in his position, I'd want some peer review if I'm under that kind of pressure. That's the kind of thing that somebody would do if they legitimately care about their product. But it just feels like he turned in the first draft and said, alright, I guess we'll go with that. There are elements of an interesting story buried somewhere in the plot, but the focus is just all over the place. It wants to tell the story of these two Jedi, but then we take a hard turn towards this CGI rabbit thing. Then we go over to a young Darth Vader, but he's not even the core character of the third act. The reality is that we just have no protagonist that we can emotionally latch to, which just makes the film kind of boring. It's a shame because this film was casted with some very talented actors, like Liam Neeson, Ewan McGregor, and Natalie Portman, but the characters they all play just kind of fall flat. There's only two things that I think saved this film from being a complete bomb. The use of practical effects before we went CGI crazy in the mid-2000s actually help it. And John Williams gave us a score that is probably comparable to the original film. I mean, this guy outdid himself. Whether we like it or not, The Phantom Menace is a canon story. And just like your drunk uncle at Thanksgiving, he's family, and I will defend him to the end. Alright, we're getting a little better. Not by much. For the longest time I considered this movie to be the worst of the series. Mostly because of the badly written romance, and somehow if you talk about sand with a girl, you get to make out. Hey, I should try that sometime. But upon multiple viewings, there's actually some elements of the story that I didn't really appreciate before. Obi-Wan's kind of like a detective in this story, and his character really isn't challenged much, so it still feels kind of dull, but the seedy underbelly story of the whole manipulation of the Senate and everything, that's actually kind of interesting. New characters like Count Dooku, who is severely underutilized by the way, gives us an example of a Jedi who can willingly leave the Jedi Order. Of course we know Anakin eventually leaves the Jedi, but Count Dooku represents a character that isn't so black and white. You're never quite sure what he's up to, and that makes him a little bit more interesting. Yes, the romance is very ham-fisted. And George did say that was the focus of this movie, a love story within the war. I mean, he made the movie that he wanted to make. Good for him. While the advancement of CGI is definitely impressive, the lack of practical effects kind of hurts the experience for me. Some other notable things about this movie in no particular order. Jango Fett is awesome. Hayden Christensen does not suck. He's a decent actor who had to work with a bad script. The arena scene is genuinely tense, and the sonic charge in space is everything I love about Ben Burtt. Ugh. Yeah, it's the best of the prequel trilogy. The biggest problem with it? It's the product of what came before it. In this story in particular, you can definitely feel George's passion once again. It's almost kind of like he needed a warm-up. The story still kind of stumbles at delivering its central ideas coherently, even though George delivers some amazing scenes. The Darth Plagueis story at the opera, contrasting the twins being born with Anakin being reborn. Or the scene where Anakin at the Jedi Temple struggles to make a decision, and when he looks across the city, Padme's looking back at him. But I feel like the only moments that I truly care about is really everything chopped up in the last 10 minutes. Whether it's nostalgia-based or not, I know where the story goes, and it goes to characters that I legitimately care about and know. Characters like Padme is okay, but I just didn't feel like she was a fully fledged character by this time. The advancements of CGI in this film are genuinely impressive, but now we get characters like General Grievous, who's this big spider thingy where, I mean, he's cool. We get toys of him, and while the final fight between Obi-Wan and Anakin is fun to watch, it just kind of goes on a little too long. It's almost like the movies were saying this is what we were all leading to, and that's kind of true, but the characters is what I care about more than the actual fighting. All in all, it is kind of nice to see how everything kind of was neatly wrapped up in a bow, even if we still get some questions never really answered. I mean, how does Leia know Padme when Luke doesn't? It's the movie no one asked for, but at this point Disney can make a movie about a gonk droid, and more than likely I will ask how much a ticket is. There's nothing really that bad about this movie. It's enjoyable enough. Actually, I think the story about making the movie is much more interesting. Between the firings and the he said, she saids, and this script is awesome and you're making it too funny, I mean, get me my popcorn, I'm all for that. It felt like a safe business bet by Disney, and I don't blame them for that. I just wish it was a more compelling story. Han doesn't really make much of a change in this story. His title changes from scoundrel to smuggler, but his traits kind of stay the same. Seeing Han and Chewie meet for the first time is a genuine delight, and Lando owning the Millennium Falcon was pretty fun to watch. I just wish the movie didn't feel like a checklist half the time. Alright guys, throw me some ideas. What do we know about Han Solo? Yes, the DL-44. Everybody loves his blaster. Let's show how he got that. That Kessel Run, very good. We can show how the ship made it in 12 parsecs. Very, very good. How he got his name? Do we need that? Is that necessary? Yeah, whatever, we'll throw it in. See what I mean? I think there was a certain allure to the idea that there would be a Star Wars movie without a Skywalker or lightsabers. And for the most part, it works. I think my favorite element of this movie is seeing the darker side of the good guys, through characters like Cassian Andor, where he's willing to get his hands dirty for the rebellion. Having top-notch casting like Felicity Jones, Ben Mendelsohn, Forrest Whitaker, and Donnie Yen certainly helped. My biggest gripe has and always will be the fact that we didn't get to know the characters as well as I would have liked. Yes, we only had one movie to get to know them, but there have been movies that have done it better. Guardians of the Galaxy is a great example. One of the more fascinating elements is that they resurrected Peter Cushing to play Tarkin again, and while it's not perfect, it is certainly a monumental achievement. I think if this movie was under any other banner besides Star Wars, it would come off as a generic action movie. That hallway scene, though. Alright. Halfway there. Let's do it. The one that started it all, and my personal favorite. While it's far from a perfect film, I can't help but regard it as a masterpiece. It has way less to do with the technical aspects of this film and much more about the impact it had on our culture and the art form. George Lucas, as this young and upcoming filmmaker, had the big idea to make the next great mythology based off of The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell, all while giving it the flair of Flash Gordon and a little bit of Kurosawa to mix in. Since my childhood, the characters of Luke Skywalker, Leia Organa, and Han Solo have been forever cemented as some of my favorite heroes of cinema, and Darth Vader will be the baddest bad guy ever. I'm 31 and I'm using terms like the baddest bad guy. Lucas knew that in order to tell this story, he would have to make practical effects that have not been invented yet. So he just invented them. Have you seen Toy Story, Jurassic Park, Lord of the Rings? All of those movies probably would not be around if it wasn't for George. But while the film itself is iconic, I don't think it would have been as iconic if it wasn't for John Williams. The musical score he wrote is easily one of the most recognizable in film history and has cemented John Williams as a musical legend. What else can I say except that this movie was the one that made me fall in love with the art form? If you have never seen it, come on over anytime. I built a theater in my house. How do you follow up one of the most successful films in Hollywood history? Just don't try. Throw in a few twists and turns. Spoiler alert, it tops it anyway. This time around, we follow Luke Skywalker learning more about the Force and the Jedi way and his deeper connections to the past. George once again pushed the genre by trying something new, making a Muppet a Jedi Master. What? Conceived on paper, I don't see how any of it could have worked, but with the help of the master puppeteering of Frank Oz and Mark Hamill's acting, they somehow pulled it off. The stakes have never been higher as the Empire chases down the rebellion, all leading up to one of the biggest twists in cinema history. It's funny how it's regarded as the best now, because when it first came out it was marred against critics, and the public didn't care for it either, saying that, well, that doesn't really feel like Star Wars. And if you want more of the same, then you can go back and watch the original movie again. But George had a bigger story to tell, and he was much more concerned with that. Kinda sounds like another movie that came out not too long ago. While the conclusion of the original trilogy certainly has its flaws, it is still a decently satisfying conclusion. The first act doesn't really have much to do with the rest of the movie, but it still doesn't take away from the Flash Gordon-esque fun. I would argue that some of the characters' plotlines could have been written a little bit differently to make it just that little more interesting, but once you get to that final battle of good and evil, you can't help but watch in awe how it all ends up. I don't have much else to say except that the Ewoks are okay, and the speeder bike chase is pretty exciting. By the way, does anybody have the music track Yub Nub from the ending of the movie? That's the only ending music I accept. When Disney announced that they had purchased Lucasfilm and said that they were making more movies, I could have sworn I was dreaming. After Revenge of the Sith, I had made peace with the fact that I wasn't getting any more movies, so please don't give me false hope. Fast forward to 2015 and we get The Force Awakens, and I was eating up every second of it. I think for what it was at the time, it was certainly a safe move, and I really didn't want it to be much else than that. It's a return to what I love about the series and gave me new characters that I could latch onto. But in the years since, it's not as aging as well as I thought it would. I was actually on the defense saying that this movie could definitely play it safe. It was the best business move, and I would have done it. But looking back, I think we do deserve a little bit better story-wise. I'll admit that I was very hesitant about seeing my childhood heroes as geriatrics. But that nostalgia, though. The film does give enough original content to be its own story, but you can definitely see the beats of A New Hope in the film. I don't think that's a bad thing, but I don't know if that was the best choice. It's still a well-executed movie, pretty to look at, and I will always enjoy giving it another watch. But with the safety factor being prioritized over giving us new original storytelling, it does dampen the experience a bit. Okay, let's do this one. Let's face it, this movie was either you loved it or you hated it. Eventually I will be doing a separate video about this movie, but for now, I'm going to summarize it with this. What I appreciate most about this movie is that Rian Johnson legitimately wanted to challenge us as viewers. He wasn't interested in doing the same old thing that came before. He wanted to take the series and look at it from a different perspective. It's almost like he looked at all the nostalgia-driven stuff of Force Awakens and said, okay, that's cool, and there's definitely a place for that, but how do we go forward? And that's kind of been my biggest argument in the defense of The Last Jedi. In order for this sequel trilogy to exist, we can't just keep doing the same thing over and over again. Everybody loves Grandma's meatloaf, but when you've had it over and over and over, eventually it gets dull. Sometimes you need someone to come along, look at the recipe, and try some new ingredients. That does not mean that we have to erase the past and look at the series like it's a bad thing. That seems to be the biggest meaning that people take away from this film when Kylo Ren says,
"Let the past die. Kill it if you have to. That's the only way to become what you were meant to be."
Rather, we should reflect on the past and learn from the mistakes. Yoda comes on screen and delivers the true message of the movie.
The greatest teacher failure is.
But while I defend it, I'm not saying it's a perfect movie. There are certainly elements of the story that feel a little overstuffed. I believe the themes being presented and the message of the movie still could have been delivered if we maybe trimmed down the side plots a little bit. But with what we're given, I think it's a worthy addition to the new canon, and it's got me legitimately excited for 9. And if you hate Luke in this movie, I understand. But I cannot deny the fact that he did the most Jedi thing ever at the end of the movie, and that proved to me that he is the hero I always knew he was. And there you have it, folks. That is all my abridged thoughts of every single Star Wars movie leading up to Episode 9. I hope you are legitimately as excited for this movie as I am, and I'm sure I will be crying for days. Thanks for watching, guys, and if you disagree with my thoughts, let me know. I would like to hear your thoughts about each movie. Maybe you think The Phantom Menace is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and I'm full of crap. Hey man, it's just like your opinion. Star Wars, nothing but Star Wars, nothing but Star Wars, ain't we have fun? I don't think that's the actual words to that song. Wait, does it even have words?